Affect is the song before language, before memory, before we even recognize ourselves. In a mirror, we feel. Feeling is our first way of knowing, and it doesn't arise randomly. It arrives as organized signals called affects. We can see this in Cornelia's earliest months. Her face lights up in alert curiosity when her father enters the room. Interest, excitement. She coos and wiggles with joy when she recognizes her mother's voice. Enjoyment, joy. She startles at the sound of a dropped object. Surprise. When hungry, she cries with increasing urgency, which is distress. When her favorite toy is taken away, she flails in anger. And in moments of overwhelm, when faces get too close or the environment too chaotic, her eyes lower and her head tilts away, an early gesture of shame. These are not taught. They arise directly from her biology. They are how she knows the world. Affect, in the language of affect theory, is the raw data of emotional life. These are not emotions yet. They are pre-verbal, precognitive flashes of aliveness. Infants know them instinctively. Adults have often forgotten. Fast forward to Cordelia in late adolescence. Her body still registers affect, but now she has years of emotional interpretation layered over it. She might feel a wave of interest towards a peer, but immediately override it with self judgment, calling it a crush I shouldn't have. She might feel shame after a failed test, but instead of crying, she calls herself lazy or stupid. Her anger at her parents gets redirected into sarcasm, her fear masked with bravado. She's constantly reconciling what she feels with what she's been taught to think about feeling it. Affect is still the song, but now she's trying to rewrite the lyrics in real time. There are only nine innate affects, two positive, interest, excitement, and enjoyment, joy. They're on a continuum. One neutral, surprise, startle, and six negative, fear, terror, anger, rage, distress, anguish, disgust, dismell, and shame, humiliation. Each one has a distinct facial expression, body posture, and biological signature. Each one is a kind of music. You might also think of them as tastes, just as our tongue senses salty, bitter, sour, sweet, and umami. These basic flavors combine to create the complexity of a dish, just as affects do. They combine to form our emotional landscape. Interest is aromatic, flagrant, stimulating curiosity, opening senses like cardamom or truffle that invite exploration. Interest excitement is always up energy. Damn, this is good. Interest is honeyed, nectarous, enveloping, lingering warmth like caramelized sugar or fresh fruit at peak ripeness. Wow, this is the best dessert ever. You relax into enjoyment, joy. Surprise, however, is effervescent, sparkling, momentary disorientation. Reminds me of my daughter with Pop Rocks, or those times with champagne where it briefly overwhelms your senses, then you reset them. Surprise startle is always a reset button for the affect system, usually immediately paired with fear, as in, damn, what's next? Fear I conceptualize as metallic, electric, sharp, immediate, like biting into aluminum foil or unripe citrus that sends signals of danger. It's an immediate spike of energy. The limbic system kicks in. Anger is scorching, searing, building heat that demands attention, like habanero peppers or wasabi that floods all the senses. It's also another limbic system activator, up energy in a big way. Distress is briny, saline, depleting, and persistent, like seawater that parches rather than quenches. Think also of a piece of clothing that irritates or a noise that slowly starts bugging you. It's a slow, steady rise in energy. And it can lead to anger. We know that with hangry. Disgust is rotten, fetid, nasty. It's instinctively repulsive, like spoiled meat that triggers immediate rejection. That's the feeling part of the gag reflex. The smell is acrid, sulfurous, stealthy, and cunning, and penetrating like rotten eggs or ammonia that forces withdrawal. The nose goes immediately up and away from the source. Shame is parching, coppery, constricting, and exposing, like strong overbrewed tea that dries in the mouth and leaves a lingering metallic aftertaste. We are very aware of the unpleasantness. Shame is the source of self consciousness and shyness on the low end, embarrassment in the middle range, and humiliation on the extreme end. Our affect system, then, is our sensory organ for telling us what the world feels like. It's the inner compass we use to navigate reality before thought intervenes. If there are many metaphors here, it's because I'm trying to do what every great artwork does: translate affects into what I'm calling dynamic vitality affects, into movement, rhythm, color, and form. In some ways, it's like trying to describe the experience of swimming to someone from a planet without water. But because you have a body, and you've likely been in water, bathed, swam, floated, you know something of what I mean. Affects, once we leave toddlerhood, are like the building blocks of language. When we learn to read and speak, we no longer pay attention to every letter or syllable. We process meaning in paragraphs, chapters, story arcs. Similarly, by adulthood, our affects are bundled into larger emotional scripts. But those original flavors, those primitive pulses, are still in there, shaping every thought, every sentence, every chapter we write about ourselves. This pre-verbal vitality is not merely developmental, it is existential. Affects are how the body speaks truth before it's filtered by cognition. They are the first drafts of emotion. In therapeutic work, rediscovering access to affect often becomes essential to healing because it reconnects people to the roots of their emotional honesty. Affect reveals what words often cannot: a tremor of fear, the pull of desire, the clench and withdrawal of shame. Reclaiming affect is not just about feeling more, it's about remembering how to feel at all. Before the self forms as a storyteller, it emerges as a sensor. We do not first experience life as concept or character, but as intensity, as rhythm, as tone. The infant doesn't think, I'm safe. The infant feels warmth, hears a soothing cadence, is held with a tuned pressure. This is affect literacy in its original form. It is embodied, it is immediate, and it is too often lost. To lose access to affect is to lose a native language. Many adults walk around fluent in analysis but mute in sensation. They speak eloquently about emotion but struggle to inhabit it. This is not a failing, it's a defense. In families or cultures where vulnerability was unsafe, the body learns to bypass feeling as a means of survival. Over time, the protective armor becomes mistaken for the self. But beneath that armor, the original pulse remains, waiting, diminished perhaps, but not extinguished. To recover affect, then, is not to regress, it is to return, to move backward only insofar as it allows us to move more fully forward. In therapeutic work, this often begins with attending to microsignals: a tightness in the chest, a heat arising in the face, a softening of the hands. These are not trivial, they are doorways. A small tear at the edge of the eye may contain more truth than a paragraph of narrative. Affect does not speak in paragraphs, it speaks in pulses. And when we learn to listen for these pulses, a reclaiming affect. And when we learn to listen for these pulses, things change. Reclaiming affect also restores agency. When we can feel, we can choose. We can say yes from the body and no from the gut. We can discern what nourishes us and what depletes us, not through rules, but through resonance. This kind of knowing is not always explainable, but it is deeply trustworthy. It is the compass of aliveness. And so, to remember how to feel is not just emotional. This is an existential issue. It is to re inhabit the self not as a role, but as a rhythm, to live not just from the neck up, but from the whole being. It is a kind of homecoming, a return not only to emotion, but to presence. Dynamic vitality affect is the dance. If affect is the song, then DVAs are the dance. They are the choreography of aliveness, the shape your body takes when emotion ripples through it, the tempo, the tension, the expansion and contraction of your movement, the way your hands hover over hesitation or your shoulders drop in surrender. DVAs are not feelings themselves, they are the movement contours of feeling, the arc of a smile, the rush of energy when you're about to speak, the gentle slump of letting go. They are not limited to dancers or artists. Everyone moves in DVAs. We speak them with our spines, our hands, our eyes. We offer them to others and read them in return. Imagine a violin note rising and then trembling slightly before falling. That motion, if you traced it in your body, that's a DVA. It's not just how we express feeling, it's also how we experience it. Dynamic vitality affects are the body's grammar of presence. They are what allows a mother to understand her baby before words. They are how an actor moves an audience without dialogue. They are what make an embrace feel safe or not. In a world obsessed with content, DVAs remind us that meaning is often found in how something is said, not just what is said. We can trace this evolution in Cordelia. At birth, her DVAs are transparent and embodied. Joy flows through her like fluid, legs kicking, arms wide, a whole body ripple of delight. Anger shows up as sharp muscle tension, arched back, clenched fists. Shame, when it comes, is a full body collapse, or sometimes just the eyes averting, the chin going down, shoulders caving in a little bit. Her body speaks clearly, no translations needed. There is no script, no performative layer whatsoever, just movement as meaning. Now picture Cordelia ideal in adolescence. She has not forgotten the language of her body. Her joy still rises in her shoulders, her eyes still widen with curiosity. When she feels afraid, she leans into the discomfort rather than away, her body still trusting that the signal is safe to feel. When she grieves, she lets her chest fall, her breath slow, letting the sorrow move through her rather than calcify. Her movements are congruent with her feelings, nuanced but authentic. She has internalized enough safety to be in a world that feels safe. And now imagine Cordelia tragic. She too feels, but her DVAs are masked, spliced, and redirected. Her fear tightens in the neck, but is suppressed by a rigid smile. Her anger flares in the jaw, but it's rerouted through sarcasm or a withering glance. Her joy, when it flickers, is constrained, careful, half laughed, then quickly extinguished. Her body dances the choreography of defensiveness, of dissonance. She has learned that certain movements are dangerous, certain tempos too vulnerable. The difference is not in capacity, but in permission. Both Cordelias have bodies capable of vitality, but only one has been allowed internally and externally to move as she feels. The other has learned to move as she must. To track DVAs is to listen to the body's poetry. It is to attune to what is alive beneath the armor. And in witnessing another's DVA, whether a flinch, a sigh, a sudden stillness, we are given the chance to respond not just to the words, but to the being beneath them. To understand DVAs allows us to track not just what a person is saying, but how their being is speaking. In psychotherapy, in teaching, and in love, we sense the congruence or dissonance of DVAs long before words register. It is not just about being expressive, it is about being legible in our full humanity. DVAs help us read each other in real time, to see the hidden script behind emotion. They are the difference between performance and presence. When someone says, I'm fine, but their shoulders remain curled inward, their breath shallow, their gaze averted, we know. We may not know cognitively, but the body knows there's something misaligned. The DVA contradicts the language, and it is in that contradiction that we often locate the truth. DVAs offer us access to a kind of relational subtext, a pre conscious intimacy that allows us to respond not only to the spoken, but to the signaled. This is especially true in healing relationships. A therapist might hear a client describe an event calmly while simultaneously watching their body tremble or their legs bounce in odd ways. That tremble is the DVA. It tells a deeper story. It's the part that wasn't ready to speak in words. In these moments, the therapist does not interpret the words alone, but tracks the embodied tempo, the push and pull of energy, the contraction and release. The work then is not just verbal interpretation, it's affect. In teaching, DVAs reveal when a student is confused but afraid to ask, curious but unsure of permission, interested but disengaged by prior conditioning. A skilled teacher learns to read the leaning in, the blinking hesitation, the shifting of weight. These are not distractions, they are data, signs of vitality at the edge of expression. To teach with attention to DVA is to teach into aliveness. In love, the stakes are even higher. We crave to be seen not just for what we say, but for how we are. Lovers who attune to DVAs sense the flicker of doubt behind a yes, the longing behind a casual glance, the unshed tears behind silence. They learn to respond not to declarations, but to gestures, to the whispered choreography of need, tenderness, fear. This is intimacy, not as performance, but as mutual legibility. When we ignore DVAs, we risk interacting with personas rather than people. We listen to rehearsed lines, not real time signals. But when we attune to DVAs, we listen with our whole nervous system. We make space for the unspeakable. And in doing so, we invite others back into the safety of their own embodied truth. DVAs are how we become fluent in each other's humanity, not through explanation, but through presence. They are the expressive grammar of what is felt, and in learning to speak them, to read them, we deepen the possibility of connection, healing, and trust. Emotion is the meaning. When affect travels through memory, language, story, and culture, it transforms into emotion. Emotions are not raw signals, they are complex compositions. Where affect is the musical note, emotion is the symphony. Emotion is the personal and cultural meaning we attach to affective experiences. It's what happens when a tight chest becomes grief, or a racing heart becomes love. Emotion requires context. They are shaped by narrative, by environment, by our own interpretations in our own histories. This is why the same affect, like surprise, can lead to different emotions. One person might feel thrilled, another person might feel terror. The affect is the same. The emotion is made. Art plays a powerful role here. A painting may evoke sadness in one viewer, serenity in another. A melody may trigger nostalgia or unease, depending on what memory it touches. Opera, for instance, exemplifies this interplay. It weaves together affective sound, expressive movement, and narrative meaning. When the soprano's voice cracks with desperation, we don't just hear it, we feel her shame, her longing, her defiance. Through affect and DVA, we are drawn into her emotional world, even if we don't understand the words. Emotions, then, are not universal, but the capacity for emotion is. And the arts are the bridge that allow us to cross from raw affect to shared meaning. They help us recognize ourselves at someone else's pain. They teach us how to name what we feel. They invite us into emotional fluency. That's where the real education begins. Here's something to keep in mind. Emotion is affect metabolized through story. It is memory wrapped around a signal. It is a culture inscribed upon sensation. And as such, it becomes a crucial site of both suffering and possibility. We are not simply emotional beings, we are emotional narrators. How we interpret our own affective life can imprison us or liberate us. The arts offer a lens to reinterpret our stories, to make meaning that heals. To feel is not only to react, but to remember. Every emotion carries within it a history, not just personal, but collective. A single pang of shame may contain echoes of a childhood reprimand, a cultural taboo, a generational silence. A surge of joy might draw from the body's memory of safety, of recognition, of ancestral celebration. When we feel, we are touching layers, and it is through narrative, internal and external, that these layers become legible. Yet these narratives that we inherit are not always kind. Some are rigid, punitive, or shrouded in silence. They tell us which emotions are permissible and which must be buried. They script joy as frivolous, anger as dangerous, grief as weakness. And so, even when affect surges within us, we may feel misled, and we may mislabel it, mistrust it, or mute it altogether. This is how emotional life becomes distorted, not by the body's signals, but by the meanings we've been taught to assign to them. This is where the transformative potential of art lies. The arts allow us to re narrate our emotions, to take the rawness of affect and wrap it not in suppression or shame, but in aesthetic form color, sound, gesture, image. And in doing so, they invite us to witness our own feelings with new eyes. They provide a medium through which suffering can be contained without being denied, and where beauty can emerge not despite pain, but through it. The story we tell about a single tear, a clenched jaw, or a trembling breath determines whether we see ourselves as broken or becoming. Through art, that story can shift. A once despised feeling may become a source of insight. A long held wound may find language, form, and resonance. Emotion ceases to be a prison and can become a portal. To metabolize affect into emotion is to take what was once overwhelming and make it interpretable, livable, even meaningful. And that is what art teaches us to do, not to bypass emotion, but to hold it with structure, with rhythm, with relational depth. Not to silence the signal, but to translate it into something we can dance to, sing through, paint with, share. We're not just feeling creatures, we are storytelling bodies. And when those stories are crafted with care, with consciousness, and creative freedom, they do not just describe what we feel, they shape who we become. The arts as affective education. The arts are one of the earliest and most enduring ways we learn how to feel. Not just what to feel, but how to feel it, where it's safe, where it's sacred, and how fully we're allowed to express it. Across every culture, artistic forms serve as emotional maps, teaching us the textures, tempos, and terrains of feeling. Children are socialized into these affective landscapes through lullabies, folk tales, body rhythms, ancestral songs, and ceremonial dances. And those can be the prom for them. It can be any place we come together to dance. These are not merely artistic expressions, they are affective scripts passed down across generations. For example, in Black American communities, gospel music often conveys hope and spiritual perseverance in the face of historical and ongoing oppression. The communal call and response, the rising crescendos, the emotionally charged vocals, these embody not only faith, but the refusal to be spiritually broken. The blues, rooted in the sorrow songs of enslaved Africans and their descendants, evolved into a genre that channels ancestral grief and hard won resilience. It offers a space to express longing, betrayal, humor, and endurance, often all within the same verse. Hip hop, in its many global forms, pulses with pride, resistance, and storytelling. In the Bronx, where it was born, hip hop provided a voice for youth navigating poverty, racial injustice, and erasure. Its global spread has transformed it into a vehicle for truth telling in Brazil's favelas, South Africa's townships, Palestine's refugee camps, and beyond. It speaks with rhythm and rhyme against systems that seek to silence or misrepresent lived experience, while offering emotional clarity, agency, and community. In many indigenous traditions around the world, drumming and chanting are more than art, they are sacred technologies. They bind the community to the land, to ancestors, to the cosmos. The heartbeat of the drum becomes a language older than words, syncing body and spirit with collective memory. These sonic rituals often serve ceremonial, healing, and intergenerational functions, preserving culture even under the threat of displacement or erasure. Classical music, particularly its European lineages, has historically carried affective lessons in refinement, sublimity, and emotional complexity. Composers like Chopin, Mahler, and Schubert explored melancholy with grandeur and restraint and offered listeners not only catharsis but contemplation. The structure, formality, and progression of classical compositions often model affect regulation, grief wrapped in elegance, joy infused with discipline, and awe constructed through mathematical harmony. Importantly, these examples are not monolithic. Within each form are variations and evolutions, hybrids born of migration, colonization, innovation, and survival. What one generation hears as grief, another might hear as celebration. What once mourned oppression may now proclaim agency. Genres evolve as cultural conversations continue. This is emotional education, and it often happens invisibly through repetition, through community, through what is praised or punished. It is never neutral. The arts shape us. They show us which affects are acceptable, which must be hidden, and which are celebrated. And in doing so, they give us both a mirror and a mask. To engage deeply with the arts is to listen again to how we were taught to feel. and perhaps to begin rewriting the score. To deepen this further is to see the arts not as luxury, but as a necessity in developing emotional literacy. Artistic engagement teaches us not only how to recognize our feelings, but how to move with them, how to dwell in their textures without rushing towards resolution. A slow ballad may train us to linger with sadness. A vibrant dance might remind us how joy wants to move. The arts give feeling a tempo, a shape, and a socially sanctioned place to live. They also create a space for contradiction. In a poem, rage and tenderness can coexist. In a painting, grief may shimmer with unexpected beauty. The arts hold emotional paradox without collapsing it. This complexity is vital because real emotional life is rarely linear. The arts offer rehearsal spaces for our interior contradictions without judgment, without agenda. More than that, the arts cultivate empathy, not as concept, but as felt experience. When we witness a character's heartbreak or a dancer's triumph, we don't just understand their emotion, we inhabit it. This capacity to be moved, to be affected, is the cornerstone of ethical and communal life. The arts build this muscle quietly across time. In this way, art becomes not just a reflection of emotional culture, but a crucible for emotional reformation. Through it, we can unlearn fear, revive numb affect, and recover lost feeling. The arts don't just teach us what we've been told to feel, they ask us to feel what we've forgotten. They remind us that emotional knowledge is not peripheral to being human, it is being human. As we grow, the arts not only teach us how to feel, they teach us how we are allowed to be in the presence of those feelings. Through this, we begin to build what we call personality. But what is personality really, if not highly practiced choreography of affective scripts? By adulthood, most of us no longer experience raw affect. Joy is laced with guilt, anger arrives cloaked in anxiety, shame is buried under achievement. These feelings still pulse within us, but the way we respond to them has been rehearsed, conditioned, polished. These responses are the scripts we've inherited from family, from media, from religion, from institutions, and yes, from art as well. Simplistic sort of examples here, but a child who grows up watching romantic comedies may internalize a script that equates love with grand gestures. A child raised on stoic westerns might learn that courage is silent and feelings are private. A young person immersed in revolutionary street art may come to understand that anger can be beautiful and change begins with expression. These internalizations form the basis of personality, not as essence, but as echo. And the scripts vary by culture, by era, by gender, by class. For some, emotions must be tightly contained. For others, emotiveness is expected and even admired. But in all cases, the arts participate in this education. They show us what feelings are welcome, what roles are rewarded, and what emotional performances are punished. This means our personalities are not just the sum of our memories, they're the sum of our performed memories. Our ways of feeling have been stylized, shaped, and scored like music. But what happens when the music we've been taught no longer fits who we're becoming? To expand this further is to see personality not as a fixed set of traits, but as a kind of emotional muscle memory. What we call personality is often the accumulation of socially approved responses, perfected over time and under pressure. It is a mask worn so often and with such skill that we forget it as a mask. Beneath it, our original affective palette still exists, bright, volatile, alive, but it waits for permission to resurface. Our scripted affects become self fulfilling. A child taught to suppress anger may become an adult incapable of setting boundaries. A teen shamed for sensitivity may grow up into a stoic parent. Over time, these affective scripts become defenses, and defenses become identities. This is not inauthenticity, it is adaptation. But it carries a cost. Because if personality is performance, then healing often begins with interruption. When a moment catches us off guard, when music or memory pulls us out of our role, we glimpse the unscripted self. That glimpse can be terrifying, or liberating, or both. It reminds us that we've been choreographed and that we can, with effort and compassion, learn new steps. There is no shame in having a personality. It is a necessary compromise of living in community. But there is courage in questioning whether the one you still have is really yours. It may have been earlier, but is it still yours? To do this work is not to dismantle the self, but to re inhabit it with fuller breath, with deeper feeling, with a more spacious vocabulary for being. Let's talk about late adolescence, the reclaiming of the second song, as I call it. There comes a moment, or maybe several, when the old score no longer plays, when the rhythms that guided you feel hollow, when these roles feel scripted beyond belief. It's time to change. When the emotional choreography of your life begins to feel like somebody else's dance, something's got to change. That moment is the doorway to late adolescence. Late adolescence is the rekindling of interest, excitement, and enjoyment, joy, the two positive affects we're born with, the first two to be socialized out of us. In childhood, they are abundant. In adolescence, they begin to falter. By adulthood, they're often buried under duty, detachment, and routine. But when we reawaken these affects, not as distractions, but as guides, something extraordinary happens. Life becomes a place of learning again. Not formal schooling, soul schooling. The kind of learning that stretches you, challenges you, unsettles and uplifts you all at once. The kind of learning that makes you rewrite your inner narratives. In late adolescence, we question the affective scripts that no longer serve us. We reauthor our emotional vocabulary. We begin to feel into life rather than merely think through it. And often, this awakening is turbulent because major changes, loss, new love, aging, coming out, becoming a parent, leaving a job, demand that we not only adapt, but relearn how to feel. They demand that we become fluent in new affective grammars, that we learn new steps in the dance. This is not regression, this is emergence. It is not a crisis of identity, it is a calling towards authorship. Late adolescence is not a second chance, it's a second composition. In expanding on late adolescence, it is important to recognize its psychological significance as profound affective reorganization. When long held internal structures, those silent expectations and unconscious scripts begin to dissolve, they make way for emotional rawness. This rawness is not merely vulnerability, it is the fertile ground from which authenticity grows. As such, late adolescence mirrors the process observed in therapeutic breakthroughs, midlife awakenings, and spiritual reckonings. Each sign of disorientation carries with it the potential for new coherence. Each moment of doubt becomes a doorway into deeper meaning. This return is often layered with grief for the years lost to emotional repression, grief for the selves never fully expressed. But in that grief is a quiet reclamation of joy, not euphoric joy, but the steady, meaningful joy that emerges when we live in congruence with our inner truths. The renewal of interest and enjoyment is not the loud exuberance of youth, but a slow burning clarity, a sense of being moved from within by the rightness of our path, however uncertain it may seem from the outside. Late adolescence requires an emotional humility. It asks us to admit that the personas we carefully constructed may no longer serve us. It demands that we enter a space of unlearning, of sitting still with disorientation, of re examining the architecture of our emotional lives. This process is not tidy, it's recursive, it spirals, but in that spiral is a wisdom older than identity, a rhythm deeper than habit. And it is through honoring this rhythm that we begin to feel not merely alive, but authored. To author your life is not to control it, it is to fine tune it, to become sensitive to its affective dissonance and resonance, to ask, what do I want to feel more of? What do I need to feel less ashamed of? What music do I want in the background of my days? The arts are a powerful place to begin, not because they give answers, but because they restore our fluency in the language of affect. They remind us of what it is to feel richly and move honestly, to cry at a piece of music, to ache in the presence of sculpture, to laugh mid poem, to move your body in rhythm to something that cannot be seen but must be trusted. Engaging with the arts is not escapism, it's return. It's rehearsal for being more fully yourself. So, what is the music of your becoming? What songs need to be remembered? What dances need to be reclaimed? What stories need to be rewritten and retold and refelt? The world you want to live in begins inside. It begins with your willingness to feel, your right to revise, your courage to dance. And in that brave moment, we find each other again, not as actors in a script, but as composers in a shared, evolving symphony. Restoring positive affects, especially interest, excitement, and enjoyment joy, is not a trivial pursuit. It is the essential work of revitalization. These affects are the emotional fuel of curiosity, of play, of connection. Without them, we do not simply feel dull, we feel lost. When they are absent, we mistake detachment for peace, numbness for maturity, disinterest for realism. But this is not the wisdom of age, it is the fatigue of affective starvation. To restore interest is to relearn how to be captivated, to allow yourself to lean forward into the world again, not with cynicism, but with wonder. Interest is the affective spark behind all learning, all growth, all intimacy. It is what makes us reach for the unknown and feel alive in the act of discovery. To restore enjoyment is to give ourselves back to the body, to let ourselves be moved by rhythm, by texture, by delight. Enjoyment is not hedonism, it is presence. It is a moment in which we are not trying to be elsewhere, other, or more. It is the now that feels full enough. Restoring these affects often requires grieving their loss. We must reckon with how they were taken from us through trauma, neglect, overperformance, cultural invalidation. We must trace their suppression not as failure, but as adaptation. And only then can we begin to coax them back, not through pressure, but through invitation. This restoration is delicate. It cannot be rushed. It begins in the tiniest permissions. To be interested in something useless, to take joy in something unproductive. These are radical acts in a culture that measures worth by output and progress. But in this space of reclaiming, we begin to grow again, not linearly, but laterally, not towards status, but towards soul. And perhaps most importantly, restoring positive affect is not a solitary task. We reawaken these feelings in relation through conversation, through art, through nature, through co regulation with those who see us as alive and capable of joy. It is not enough to remember how to feel, we must feel with. And in doing so, we co create the world we wish to live in, one where vitality is not rare, but shared.